Welcome back to the Science Podcasts, and today we're kicking off our cybersecurity series.
Oh, very exciting.
Yeah. When you think about hacking, you probably picture someone, I don't know, stealing credit card numbers or maybe taking down a website or something like that.
Right, right.
But what about taking down an entire power grid?
That's a whole other level.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting and kind of scary.
And what's fascinating here is the intersection of renewable energy, specifically solar power, and its vulnerability to cyber attacks. It's a relatively new area of concern, but as solar energy, becomes more integrated into our power grids, the potential for disruption becomes increasingly significant.
Yeah, and that's what we're diving into today. We've got a stack of researching news reports about hackers targeting solar power systems. It's kind of a wild ride, honestly. Are we talking about like a dystopian sci-fi scenario or a genuine threat? Let's find out. Okay, so let's unpack this. So solar panels are connected to the internet, right? They've got these things called inverters that convert the sun's energy into electricity and send it to the grid. But apparently these inverters can be hacked.
Yeah, that's right.
Like one security researcher was actually able to hack into a solar power park in India and remotely switch off the entire plant.
Yeah, and this highlights the vulnerability of the Internet of Things. Where everyday devices are connected to the internet. The problem is many of these devices, including solar inverters, are often deployed with like weak passwords or default settings that hackers can easily exploit.
Hold on, you're telling me someone could literally like turn off the power to thousands of homes from their laptop?
It's theoretically possible, yeah. A hacker who gains control of a large number of solar inverters could potentially disrupt the flow of electricity to the grid and, yeah, cause blackouts.
Wow. So how widespread is this vulnerability? The sources mention a hacker in the Netherlands who found vulnerabilities in a popular brand of solar inverter and was technically able to access millions of units globally. Imagine controlling a huge chunk of the world's solar energy from your basement.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild to think about. While technically possible, the actual impact of such an attack is difficult to determine. The grid has safeguards in place to prevent large-scale disruptions, and the amount of solar power a hacker can realistically control at any given time is unclear.
Okay, so maybe it's not as simple as like flipping a switch and plunging the world into darkness.
Right.
But this brings up another interesting point, like who would even want to do this? The sources mentioned state-sponsored hackers from China and Russia potentially targeting power grids for strategic or political purposes.
Yeah. Cyber warfare is a growing concern, and energy infrastructure is a prime target. Nations with the capability to disrupt power grids could use it as leverage in political conflicts or to sow chaos and instability.
That's a scary thought. So what can be done to protect these systems? We need some solutions here.
Well, there's several things we can do. First, manufacturers need to prioritize security in the design and production of these devices. This includes using strong encryption, regularly updating software, and eliminating default passwords.
Okay, so that's on the manufacturers. And what about us, regular folks with solar panels on our roofs? What can you do?
You play a role too. Be sure to change default passwords, keep your systems updated, and be wary of suspicious activity. Report any potential vulnerabilities to the manufacturer or relevant authorities.
Right on. So it's not just about protecting our data anymore. It's about protecting our entire power infrastructure. That's a pretty big responsibility.
They need to, build security into the DNA of these devices, not treat it as an afterthought. That means using strong encryption, eliminating those pesky default passwords, and making it easy for users to update their systems. It's not rocket science,
Right.
but it's essential.
Right. Because who wants to be the person who left the back door open for a hacker? It seems like common sense, but I guess it's easy to overlook these things when you're focused on just making the technology work.
Exactly. And it's not just about the initial design. Manufacturers also need to be proactive about identifying and patching vulnerabilities after the devices are deployed. Think of it like regular maintenance for your car.
Okay.
You wouldn't wait for your engine to seize up before changing the oil, would you?
No, definitely not. So manufacturers need to stay on top of security updates and make sure users can easily install those updates. But what about policymakers? What role do they play in all of this?
Governments can play a critical role in setting cybersecurity standards and regulations for energy infrastructure. They can incentivize manufacturers to prioritize security, create guidelines for vulnerability disclosure and patching, and establish frameworks for incident response.
So it's about creating a level playing field and making sure everyone is following the same rules when it comes to cybersecurity.
Precisely. And it's not just about setting standards, it's about enforcing those standards and holding companies accountable when they fail to meet them.
Right, because without enforcement, those standards are just words on paper. But okay, let's talk about the everyday user. You mentioned that we have a role to play too. So what can we do to protect our own systems and contribute to the overall security of the grid?
Well, first and foremost, you need to be aware of the potential risks, just like you protect your computer with antivirus software and strong passwords. You need to take similar precautions with your solar power system.
Okay, that makes sense. So what are some specific steps we can take?
Start by changing the default password on your inverter, and any associated Wi-Fi networks use strong, unique passwords that are difficult for hackers to guess, and make sure to keep your systems updated, install any security patches that are released by the manufacturer.
So it's the same basic cybersecurity hygiene that we should be practicing with all of our devices?
Exactly, and just like you wouldn't open an email attachment from a sender you don't recognize, be wary of any suspicious communications or requests related to your solar power system.
Right, because if something seems fishy, it probably is.
Precisely, and if you do notice anything suspicious, report it to the manufacturer or your utility company. Immediately, early detection is key to preventing more serious problems.
This is making me realize that cybersecurity is not just about technology, it's about human behavior too. It's about being aware of the risks and taking simple steps to protect ourselves.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in building a more secure digital world.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from manufacturers building more secure devices to policymakers setting standards and everyday users practicing good cybersecurity hygiene. It seems like a multifaceted problem requires a multifaceted solution. But let's get back to the tech side of things for a moment. What are some of the more advanced solutions being developed to protect our power systems? I'm thinking about things like artificial intelligence and machine learning. I've heard a lot of buzz about those technologies.
AI and ML R&D playing an increasingly important role in cybersecurity. They can be used to analyze vast amounts of data from the grid in real time, identifying anomalies and potential threats that would be difficult for humans to detect.
So it's like having an army of digital detectives constantly monitoring the grid for suspicious activity.
That's a great analogy. These AI-powered systems can learn to recognize patterns of malicious behavior, detect intrusions, and even predict potential attacks before they happen.
That sounds incredibly powerful. It seems like AI could be a game changer in the fight against cybercrime, but earlier you mentioned that AI is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for evil. Can you elaborate on that?
Of course, while AI can be a powerful force for good in cybersecurity, it's important to remember that hackers can also leverage this technology. They can use AI to automate their attacks, making them more sophisticated and harder to detect.
So it's like an arms race with both sides using increasingly sophisticated technology to try to outmaneuver each other.
Precisely as defenders develop new AI-powered defenses, attackers will find ways to counter them. It's a constant cat-and-mouse game.
That's a bit unsettling. It seems like the bad guys always seem to be one step ahead.
It can feel that way sometimes, but we're making progress. The key is to stay vigilant, adapt to new threats, and continually invest in research and development to stay ahead of the curve.
Okay, so AI is a double-edged sword. It could be used to enhance security, but it can also be used by hackers to launch more sophisticated attacks. What about other emerging technologies? Is there anything else on the horizon that holds promise for protecting our power systems?
One technology that's generating a lot of interest is blockchain. You may have heard of blockchain in the context of cryptocurrencies, but it has applications far beyond that.
I have heard of it, but I mostly associate it with Bitcoin and other digital currencies. How does blockchain apply to cybersecurity and protecting the grid?
Blockchain is essentially a decentralized and immutable ledger that can be used to record and verify transactions in a secure and transparent manner.
Okay, I'm following so far, but how does that translate to protecting a power grid?
Imagine using blockchain to track the flow of electricity through the grid. Every transaction, every change in power output would be recorded on the blockchain, making it virtually impossible for hackers to tamper with the data.
So it's like having a tamper-proof audit trail for the entire power grid.
Exactly. And because blockchain is decentralized, there's no single point of failure that hackers can target. It would make the grid much more resilient to attacks.
That's impressive. It seems like blockchain could be a real game changer for grid security. Are there any other potential applications of blockchain in this field?
Blockchain could also be used to create secure communication channels between different components of the grid, making it much harder for hackers to intercept and manipulate data.
So it's not just about protecting the data itself, but also about securing the communication channels that carry that data.
Precisely. And because a blockchain is transparent, it can also help to build trust between different stakeholders in the energy ecosystem.
This is all very encouraging. It seems like there are so many innovative solutions being developed to address these cyber threats. But before we get too carried away with all the tech talk, I want to bring it back to the human element. What are some of the things that individuals and organizations can do to foster a culture of cybersecurity? It's not just about the technology, it's about changing mindsets and behaviors, right?
You're absolutely right. Technology is only part of the solution we need to create a culture where cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility.
Okay, I like that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, but how do we actually do that? How do we get people to take cybersecurity seriously and make it part of their daily routine?
It starts with education and awareness. We need to educate people about the risks, teach them how to protect themselves, and make cybersecurity a part of our everyday conversations. Think about it this way. Think about it this way. We teach kids about fire safety and stranger danger. Why not teach them about cybersecurity too? It's just as important in today's digital world.
That's a great point. We need to start educating people about cybersecurity from a young age and make it part of our overall safety awareness. But it's not just about kids, right? Adults need to be educated too.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individuals. Organizations need to make cybersecurity a top priority. As well, they need to invest in security training for their employees, implement strong security policies, and conduct regular security audits.
So it's about creating a culture of cybersecurity that permeates all levels of society, from individuals to organizations to governments. We need to be thinking about cybersecurity all the time, not just when something bad happens.
Exactly. We need to move from a reactive approach to a proactive approach.
Okay, I'm getting a much better understanding of the multifaceted nature of cybersecurity, but now I want to shift gears a bit and talk about something that's been on my mind throughout this conversation. The geopolitical implications of all of this. We talked about hackers and cyber criminals, but what about nation states using cyber attacks as a weapon that's a whole other level of scary?
It is indeed, as our energy infrastructure becomes increasingly reliant on digital technologies, it also becomes a potential target for nation states seeking to exert influence, disrupt their adversaries, or even wage war.
So we're not just talking about hackers stealing data or causing localized blackouts anymore. We're talking about countries attacking each other's power grids, potentially causing widespread chaos and disruption that sounds like something straight out of a spy movie.
It might sound far-fetched, but it's a real concern, and the motives can vary. Some countries might use cyber attacks to gain a strategic advantage, cripple their opponents' economies, or sow discord among their populations. Others might use them as a form of retaliation or as a way to project power.
Wow, the stakes are incredibly high, but let's be realistic. Can a cyber attack really bring a country to its knees? Can it really cripple a nation's economy or disrupt essential services on a large scale?
The potential for disruption is significant, especially as our reliance on technology grows. Think about all the things that depend on electricity, hospitals, transportation systems, communication networks, financial institutions. Disrupting the power grid can have a cascading effect, impacting virtually every aspect of modern life.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. It's not just about the lights going out. It's about the potential for widespread chaos and disruption that could paralyze a country. But what are some real-world examples of this happening? Have there been any documented cases of nation-states using cyber attacks to target energy infrastructure?
There have been several high-profile incidents in recent years. One notable example is the 2015 attack on Ukraine's power grid. It's widely believed that Russian hackers were behind the attack, which left hundreds of thousands of people without electricity.
I remember hearing about that. Wasn't it a pretty sophisticated attack?
It was the attackers used a combination of malware, spear phishing, and social engineering techniques to gain access to the control systems and disrupt the flow of electricity.
So it wasn't just a brute force attack. They used a combination of tactics to infiltrate the system.
Exactly, and that's what makes these attacks so difficult to defend against. The attackers are constantly evolving their techniques, finding new ways to exploit vulnerabilities and bypass security measures.
Okay, so Russia has been implicated in these kinds of attacks. Are there any other countries that pose a significant cyber threat?
China is another country that has been identified as a major player in cyberspace. They have been accused of stealing intellectual property, conducting espionage, and engaging in cyber attacks against various targets.
So it's a complex and constantly evolving landscape of threats, and it seems like the lines between cybercrime espionage and traditional warfare are becoming increasingly blurred. But okay, let's shift gears again and talk about solutions. What can be done to protect our critical infrastructure from these nation-state actors? It seems like they have vast resources and sophisticated capabilities at their disposal.
You're right, the challenge is significant, but it's not insurmountable. It requires a multifaceted approach that combines technology policy and international cooperation. One key aspect is deterrence. By making it clear that cyber attacks will have consequences, we can discourage potential adversaries from launching them in the first place.
So it's about sending a strong message that we're not going to tolerate these kinds of actions.
Exactly, and that deterrence can take many forms. It could involve diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, or even the threat of retaliatory cyber attacks.
So it's kind of like the concept of mutually assured destruction during the Cold War, but in the cyber realm.
There are certainly parallels. The idea is to establish a credible deterrent that makes potential attackers think twice before launching an attack. But deterrence alone isn't enough. We also need strong defenses.
Right, because even with the best deterrent strategy, there will always be actors who are willing to take the risk. So how do we strengthen our defenses?
We need to harden our critical infrastructure, making it more resilient to cyber attacks. That involves a combination of technical solutions such as robust firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and encryption protocols, as well as human and procedural safeguards such as rigorous security audits, employee training, and well-rehearsed incident response plans.
It sounds like a multi-layered approach, kind of like a castle with multiple walls and moats.
Exactly, and it's an ongoing process. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, so we need to stay vigilant, adapt our defenses, and constantly strive to stay one step ahead of the attackers. We also need to foster international cooperation. Cyber attacks don't respect borders, so we need to work together to share information, coordinate our defenses, and develop international norms and standards for responsible behavior in cyberspace.
So it's not just about each country protecting itself, it's about working together as a global community to address this shared threat.
Precisely, cybersecurity is a global challenge that requires a global solution.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored the vulnerabilities, the threats, and the potential solutions. It's been a fascinating and at times unsettling journey.
It is a complex and challenging issue, but it's also an incredibly important one. As our world becomes increasingly interconnected and reliant on technology, cybersecurity is no longer just a technical issue, it's a societal issue, a national security issue, and a global issue.
That's a great way to put it. Cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, and it's something that we all need to be thinking about, not just experts and policymakers.
Exactly, and the more we understand about the threats and the solutions, the better equipped we'll be to protect ourselves, our communities, and our nations.
Well said. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cybercrime and solar energy. We hope you found it informative and engaging. Until next time, stay curious.